Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Walden Art. Today we're going to be doing an art review and critique on one of the artwork that one of my patrons turned in. He turned in a red SONJA piece where he inked, and then he's an aspiring inker, and he's gonna have me do an art review. So a little bit about my Patreon. I have a Patreon page where you can go there, and there's different tiers of showing support for me making these videos for you. If you're interested in supporting me on this channel, feel free to check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/WaldenWongArt, and as well, there's also a mentorship tiers on my Patreon. So if you're an aspiring artist that wants to be a penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, any of those, there's assignments that you can download on my Patreon, and you can do the work, and then once you're done, you will send me the files, and I would do art and review critiques just such as this video. And then once I'm done, I will send you a hard copy of that file through email, and then I'll also upload this video to YouTube for everyone to learn from. So if you're a viewer and you have questions, comment down below, and I'll also answer your questions. And a little bit about me: my name is Walden Wong. I'm a comic book artist from Marvel and DC. You can check out my work over on my website. My website is waldenwongart.com. On my website, it'll show you some of the projects I worked on for Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Image Comics, all those different publishers, as well as a gallery, news, events, and a bio, and all that good stuff. I also have a store page, so if you're interested in purchasing original artwork or prints and collections from Amazon or art supplies that I've used, check out my website. It always leads you to links to all those products. So without further ado, I'm going to check out Hank's artwork, and I'm going to be doing a review and a critique on his work. So here is the red SONJA piece. We're going to take a look at the whole piece right over here. And let's take a look at the pencils. Here's the pencils. The pencils were done in, well, actually the pencils are done in regular gray pencil, but the artist who scanned it sent it out, and it was converted to blue line. Blue line is what you see here, where everything is kind of like a light blue. The reason it's in light blue is after an inker gets the file and they ink it, and once it's inked and scanned, the inker can knock out all the blue. So back in the old days, inkers would take original pencils that would ink directly on top of it, and then when they're done, they would just use an eraser and erase all the pencils that are underneath. In this case, because everything is done digitally, artists can be all around the world. They can be like in Brazil, and they'll draw something, and they'll send it to somewhere in France or United States, and the inker ink it. This saves time. They'll just scan the artwork, and then they'll upload the artwork or email the artwork to the other artists, and they can do the work there. And then a lot of we don't have to deal with FedEx shipping or customs or anything like that. So it's in blue, so the inker will ink it, and then once it's done, they would go in there and knock out the blue in Photoshop. But one of the questions that Hank had was, when I scan the artwork, sometimes I still have a little bit of blue. So he scanned this one. I can see there's a little bit of blue over here where it says Dynamite, and if we zoom in, there's some of the blues. And he said, I'm trying to remove some of the blues, but I can't really remove it completely. How do I do that? So I'm going to also demonstrate in this video how I go about knocking out as many of the blues that I can. So the first step is I want to scan the artwork. Usually when I scan it, I'll use Photoshop, and then here I go to File, and then I go to Import, and I'll click WIA support. Once you click that, whatever scanners that you have connected and turned on, you'll open up that file, and then you can choose which printer and scanner. And then usually when I'll scan it at 600 dpi in color. You have the option of scanning in grayscale, and you have the option of scanning in black and white. Usually I'll scan everything in color at 600 dpi. This way you pick up as many information as you can. Here's the scan. So the scan looks exactly like this when I'm done. And then when I knock out the color, I'll use the magic wand. The magic wand is this little icon over here. It looks exactly like a magician with the wand. Well, it looks like a wand. And then here you can see that there is little stars right along with it. So that's the magic wand. Or you can just do the quick key W on your keyboard, and when you're using Photoshop, that's the magic wand. Okay, so here there's two ways. Okay, right up here, once you click the magic wand, there's something that says contiguous right over here, and you can click it or unclick it. Now if you click it, if you have those clicked, anytime you select the blue area, I'll zoom in, here's a blue area. If I click this blue area, it's only going to select that area. You can add selection here, you can remove selection here. So if you're adding, you can click on all the areas that you want selected. Now, you're probably thinking, why would I want to spend all that time doing clicking all these little blue areas, which can take quite an amount of time. So what you want to do is I'll unclick contiguous. Now, when you unclick contiguous, when you select one blue color, Photoshop is going to find everywhere within that file that same color. So if I click this blue, notice that it selects everywhere else that's the same blue. If you have different shades of blue, I'm just going to go in there, make sure you have the add selection, which is this little box that has two solid boxes. I'll click onto another blue area, for example, right here, and then it'll find all the blues that's within that area. So right here, before I do anything else, I'm just going to look around to see if there's any darker blue or lighter blue that hasn't been selected. Like right here, there's a little bit of light blue, so I'm going to click on that one, and then that selects all the blue areas. So I'm going to just move around. So you notice that these crawling ants, that's just a selection on Photoshop. That tells Photoshop what you're going to do with those areas outside, actually inside, okay? So we have most of those areas selected except for the black. So now that I have everything selected, and all you need to do, I'm going to zoom in closer so you guys can see, all you need to do is on your keyboard, there's a delete button, just click delete, and then all of that will delete. So once I deleted that, now all we have is just the line work. Now we don't want any of the that checkerboard pattern, because this is more like a PNG file. So I'm just gonna go in there and create a piece of paper on the back and just make that a white piece of paper. I just created a new layer right over here, and then that new layer, I'm just gonna call it paper, white paper, P-A-P-E-R. And then I'm just gonna grab white color, use my bucket tool, fill that in so I can see the line work a little bit better. So here is white. I'll click OK, use my bucket tool, just fill in the white, make sure I'm on the same layer. And then now we have everything just the line work. So if we look closely, we don't see any blues anymore. And that's how I remove all the blues in Photoshop. So now that I remove the blues, what I want to do is I go to image, mode. I want to convert that color image into a grayscale, because you don't want to be sending out like a high resolution files that's like a lot of pixels and stuff. So I just go to grayscale and I'll click enter. This is when you're done. But for me doing this art review, I'm just gonna leave it on grayscale so we can toggle between the pencils and the inks. Okay, so we're gonna go and take a look at the inks. This paper does bleed. If you're using a quill and then it's bleeding, try to switch over to a brush. I remember sometimes if you're working on a Bristol board and the quality is really bad, like actual hand paper instead of digital inking, if you're working with a traditional Bristol board and a quill, that quill sometimes does scratch into the paper and it will cause that bleeding. And if it does have bleeding, try to switch over to the brush and then do some inking, and then that should give you a more cleaner line. So again, on the bottom of these, I would make the bottom of these loops thicker, and then the top part a little bit thinner line. So just repeat a few more. So this one's pretty good. This one's thick, and then actually go up to here is a little bit thinner. Just be a little bit consistency. I would work on some of the lines, making sure that they don't bleed. I do see a lot of bleeding here, and this is probably because of the Bristol board that you're using. In some cases it could be also the ink. Make sure you shake up the ink really well. Sometimes pigment sits on the bottom and then the top of the ink is kind of like liquidy, and then it does cause bleeding. But if you can get a good quality Bristol board that I've used in the past that you can buy in art stores, is the Canson Bristol board. I'll add links below this video to some of the art supplies, and also links to other art supplies that I use. The Canson Bristol board is pretty good. Strathmore is pretty good. Okay, we're going to take a look at some of the other areas, like this little medallion in here. I would just go thicker around here. So line widths are very important. Same with also like the shoulder pad up here. I would beef up this line. I would beef up that line a lot. Okay. Now the reason we want to make those lines thicker is, like, for example, if you're inking a hand, this arm here is done pretty nicely. This arm over here, that really thick line, because that shows weight. The more weight you show, the better that line looks. Now the hand, because this line over here is so thick, I would go in here and also beef up this line. Okay, make that line a little bit thicker on the bottom of this side. One of the fun things to do when I'm inking fingers is I would like to bounce the knuckles and everything as much as I can. So for example, I will also keep in mind where the light source is coming from. Light source, if it's coming from the top, I would make that lighter, and then any areas that's a shadow. Let's just say the light is coming from this direction, okay? Coming in this direction. That said, I would make up this line a little bit thicker here, and then thin here. Okay, I would bounce that way around. And then as I get to here, it gets thinner, and then here, I would just make it thicker. Okay, just bounce those lines around. Okay, if this line is so thick, we want to keep that consistency popping outwards. Right over here. This thumb here is done nicely. I like how it's really thick and smooth, and it gets thin and then thick and then thin and thick. That's called line weights. Now the outside of the character, we call this, in comic book terms, this is the holding line. Holding line is usually the outside of the object. When you're inking the outside of the object, you want those lines to be a little bit thicker compared to what's on the inside. I know this is some of this spark over here. I would actually beef it up a little bit just to make it a little bit thicker, because this spark, this flame thing, or this liquid blood squishing out, is a little bit in the foreground, so I want that to be thicker than the lines back here. Just remember, if you're drawing something or if you're inking up something, if you have 3 objects, I'm just going to draw three rectangles. These 3 rectangles, they're right next to each other. Right now they have the same line weight. But if you go in there and you beef up this line that's in the foreground really thick, and then the middle ground like a little bit thicker, like this, and then the background, keep it thin, you're going to create much more depth than just having it in the same line weight. The same for if I drew these 3 rectangles here, all of a sudden you have this one really thick, and then the one in the foreground, it's only like a little bit thinner. It doesn't look as nice as this one. It's just stacked more nicely in order. Let's take a look at this here. So right now we have Red Sonja's forearm over here. It does kind of get lost between the head over here and this one, because so at quick glance, sometimes colors will make mistakes like this. At quick glance, they would think of this as the part of the head. So what I would do is I would beef up the holding line of the head. So that head, I would just make that line a little bit thicker just to help separate from the arm back there. Okay, good job on the knuckles here. Again, light source and beef up some of the lines. So here I would go here, make this really thick, and then kind of go thin, and then go thick, and then thin. Okay. Okay, make some of the lines a little bit thicker here. Let's see, let's take a look at some of the areas. Now, when I'm hatching or when I'm tapering lines, and I think this is mostly because there's some bleeding. When you're spacing lines, when you're doing some of these hatch lines, it's nice that you have it consistent starting out. But I would go in there and try to be a little bit more like space it a little bit more evenly. Okay, so what I mean is if you're drawing lines, you want the distance in between each line to have equal distance, like the distance between here and here and here, like that. You don't want one line to be like this close. All of a sudden you have a few lines that's further apart, and then the line that's thicker and further apart. You want everything to be spaced apart, evenly further apart or evenly closer together. The key is keeping consistency spaced evenly apart. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other areas. Yeah, just control your brush, make it a little bit sharper, land it very lightly, and then press down. Land it very lightly, press down. Now some artists, they like going from thin to thick, or other artists still like going from thick to thin. It's really your preference and then what you like to do. I'm one of the artists which I like to push away from me. For example, that means if I'm inking, I like to go thin, and then away from my body, I'll go thick. Majority of the inkers and artists, when they're inking, they like to go thick, pulling towards the body, and then they'll ease up on that line. So both directions is okay. It's whatever you're interested in doing. Okay, I'm going to rotate this back into place and then take a look at some of these other areas. So right here, I know that this is just blood and it's going to be colored, but even with blood, you see this this holding line of this helmet over here. You see how thick that is? That's thicker than the foreground. That goes back to this rule of having foreground thicker, middle ground medium thickness, and a background further back. Okay, so this part I'm going to go in here and just make this line a little bit thicker, just to pop this in the foreground. And then at the same time, some of these butts areas, I just thick and I go thin here and I go thick, and it just bounce that around. The more you bounce the line weights around, the nicer, the more depth it looks. If it's just a flat line, it doesn't create depth. A lot of times when we're doing comic book artwork, they're just 2D drawings. You're inking it, you're trying your best just to make the lines pop out. Okay, good job on this line here where this is thick and then it goes thin over there. This is in the foreground. If this is in the foreground, this line here should be a little bit thicker than these lines here. So if this line is that thick here, you want that line to be even thicker because it's kind of coming forward in the foreground. Sometimes when you're inking, there will be times where you're going to get to an area where it's kind of not fun to ink, and that happens often. I just go in there and just make those textures a little bit nicer, make it a little bit neater. Take your time on that. Make sure everything is spaced evenly in the right side. Sometimes pencilers will draw it kind of off. So as an inker, don't just trace the lines, go in there and try to make those lines consistent. So for example, I'll go in here and I'll make this loop. I'll go in here, I'll make that loop, and then I'll create like a guide for myself to make sure everything stays within that top and bottom line. Same thing with these little these little ribbon, these little bracelet thing over here. I'll just make the bottom a little bit thicker. Okay, next job on this thumb here. Bottom line thicker, top line thinner. Good job on these little round spikes over here. I want to make this pop out more again. Look how thick that line over here is. It's really thick, so I'm going to make this a little bit thicker right over here, this part. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other areas. Okay, let's take a look at, okay, so here's another example of foreground, middle ground, and how we beef things up. A lot of bleeding, Hank. There's a lot of bleeding in this. Very important. Try to get like the Canson Bristol board that I recommend. If it's a lot of bleeding and you're using a dip pen like a Crow Quill Hunt, you can switch over to a micron or fine liner. That would eliminate some of the bleeding over here. So here I'm going to go thick here, and then thick over here, just to pop that in the foreground. And then here, I would make up this line, make this a little bit thicker. Same with this, kind of like accentuate some of the lines, corner, make that thick, and then go thin. And then right here, protrude out a little bit, and then just continue that, okay? Okay, some of these hatch lines, I would go in there, and again, spacing is very important. Keep things spaced evenly, and then you want to close up these little taper lines also. Okay, just make, yeah, there's a lot of bleeding. Yeah, a lot of bleeding. I would, it's a nice piece, but then there's a lot of bleeding. This is only if I zoom in closer. For most of the time, try to eliminate the bleeding. If you're working with a new Bristol board, what I usually do is I'll take a quill or a brush or anything, and then on the back of the paper, I would just, you know, kind of make a little mark there to see if there's any bleeding. If there is bleeding, I would just scrap the whole piece of paper. I would turn it to the back and try to see if there's any bleeding there. Sometimes it bleeds on one side, it doesn't bleed on the other side. And if it bleeds, I would just grab the whole piece of paper and then buy a new pack of paper or do something else. Because the time you spend on creating artwork and you're making it bleed, it just a lot of, like, it's a wasted effort. Try to make your art look as clean as possible. Okay, I'm going to talk about some of these lines on the hair. There's a little bit of wobbliness. Okay, when I'm inking, what I like to do is, instead of inking that line slowly, following the pencil line, I'll do a ghost line. A ghost line is when I'm trying to mimic that motion without putting pen to paper. Once I have that motion, then I'll ink that line really fast. The quicker you ink the line, the smoother that line will look. The slower you ink that line, the more wobbly that line looks. Like if you're going in there and let's see, let's find an area. Like for example, we're gonna look at this line right here. See that shakiness right over here? There's a little bit of shakiness. What I'll do is I'll tilt the paper just so my hand finds the right angle. And then here, don't go slowly. If you go slowly and you draw that line, there's always going to be some shakiness. But if you mimic that motion and then you ink that line very quickly, that line will be very smooth. Okay, so that's something to think about. Just look at where you want to start drawing that line and look at your destination. Your hand will automatically just go there. You don't need to look at where your line is moving. You need to look here, you need to look there, and then your hand will automatically stop there. It's just like you're jumping from one area to another. You're looking at the area that you want to jump to. You're not looking at all the spaces in between that distance that you're jumping during the destination, during the journey. You're looking at the destination to get that line as smooth as you can. So try to go in there and do ghost line and then come back in there and just complete the line. Sometimes you'll have an arc that's a little bit longer. I would just go back in there and just finish it with 2 lines. I use a lot of templates when I'm inking traditionally by hand, so feel free to grab some ovals and templates. I also add links below my video description, so if you need to use order some on Amazon, you can also order some there. Okay, a lot of times when I'm doing work such as this and these things, I'm using templates for everything. I know it takes a little bit longer. You need to use 2 hands and you need to find the right size, but the end result just looks so much nice. Like for example, like some of these round areas, I would actually go in there with a repeatograph pin. I would put my template over there and I would focus on what areas need to be darker. So for example, each ring, I would have the outside ring, and then the outside ring, I would have the bottom of that thicker because of the light source. And then the inside ring, I will ink that, and then with my repeatograph, I will make this side a little bit thicker. Okay, this way it has depth into your artwork instead of just one dead line, one flat line. I like how you have broken up that line. Like add a little dot there. This dot helps readers complete that line. Okay, and also yeah, just a lot of blood instead of just the one flat line. I still would add line weights to this. So line weights such as the outside here, a little bit thicker here, thinner and then thicker. Again, I I'm mindful about where the light and the shadow is coming from. Okay, let's look at a good job on these tapering lines. And again, it's just a little bit of bleeding, but the spacings here is good. Where it starts and where it ends is pretty good. The white part where it ends is also very good. So that's very nice there. Yeah, a lot of bleeding. A lot of bleeding. Okay, so this area right here, I know this strap you have it out there. I would just make sure I would ink that further out just to come out a little bit, have it go outside of the body. You did it here, which is very nice, but make sure that comes out here. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other areas. Good. Okay, now right here, foreground, background, we have the hand here, which is like a nice thickness right over here. But this thigh here is really thick and light. If this line is that thick, I would go in here and make this line even thicker just to beef it up a little bit more. I always keep track of foreground and background. Things that are closer to the front is thicker, middle ground a little bit medium thickness, and then background really small. Okay, let's take a look at this. And then hatch lines, try to focus on distance. So like for example, some of these, I would kind of make sure this spaced evenly. Or if you need them to be closer, make sure, because don't have like these so thick or over here and all of a sudden these are so close together. Be consistent. So for example, if I was gonna go in here and I was inking all these lines, I would start off thick first and then gradually ease up and go thinner. And I just hold the brush or the quill and just ink those lines a little bit smaller. And then you have some areas that are black, I would just use my brush again, just kind of like do a cross hatch kind of thing, and then just have it lightly disappear and soften up like this. Okay, that way you have like hatch lines, and it slowly becomes like this this pattern here, and it becomes black and it goes into the black like this. Okay. Okay, for the most part, you have good control. It's just a lot of bleeding. Just make sure some of these close up a little bit. You want some of those lines to close up, and make sure foreground objects are popping up in the front by making those holding line thicker. So when I say holding line isn't just the thickness of one object. I always think of the holding line as each object. So for example, this arm can be a holding line. This arm here can be a separate holding line. There's also foreground, middle ground, and then background on each object. Okay, like over here, this part over here can be a little bit thicker just to pop forward from this line. See, this line is so thick over here. I want to make that line thicker just to pop it out more in the foreground. And then as I get up to here, I will have a thinner line here. Maybe make this pop out a little bit like that, just to give it more depth. Same with here. I would beef up this line because it's in the foreground, and then I'll keep that line here. I would just make some of these lines a little bit darker, just to show more of the muscle forms. Okay, good job here. Okay, and eyes, make sure it's looking at the right direction. You have this, the iris here is a little bit too high. When I'm drawing eyes or inking eyes, I want to make sure the spacing, like the sclera, the white part, you want to have equal distance in all the areas. So I'm just going to move that maybe like right over there. Okay, and eyebrows, I like inking eyebrows. I like kind of like hatch in the eyebrows. Yeah, instead of, I know some artists will just draw a line like this. I actually like kind of like filling in that line and then kind of give it some feathering just to make it look a little bit more real. Okay, so there you have it. That's the red Sonja piece. Pretty good. Majority of the mistakes is mostly from the bleeding paper. Mix some of the line, focus on which area, the line weights, the line thickness, which ones are thicker, which ones are thinner. Like this belt over here, I would have beefed up this belt way thicker. Okay, just push it in the foreground. Almost the same thickness as this line over here, just push it way thicker like that. And also some of these, I'll just also make it a little bit thicker just so it pops up in the foreground. And there you have it. Let's zoom back and take a look at the whole image. And again, this was by Hank, one of my patrons. And we're going to take a look at the pencils, and here's the pencils right over here. Any comments, comment down below, and I'll respond to all your questions and comments. If you have suggestions on future videos and what you'd like to see, feel free to comment, and then I'm always happy to look at suggestions. And if you're interested in being one of my patrons, or you just want to show support for this channel, check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/WaldenWongArt. Over there, a lot of different tiers that you can look at, and a lot of different mentorship tiers. And while you're checking out my social media, you may as well just check out my website. My website is WaldenWongArt.com, and on my website, there's links to all my different social medias that you can look at. There's also news, events, a blog, a store, and Amazon page, even an Amazon store that shows you some of the graphic novels that I worked on that you can order directly on Amazon, as well as all the art supplies that I use when I'm creating artwork. Anything you order from there, I get a little bit of commission. You don't pay any extra. It's just referral links. So thank you very much for that. So until next time, keep on drawing, keep on inking, and the more you practice, the better you get. Take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.